here he is, Louis Lortie from Montreal, and I am in Paris. How are you doing, Louis?
I'm fine. I mean, I'm really focusing on the positive things of life as it's quite a discipline, I must say, these days.
Quite a struggle. So Louis is a close friend, and I know all the guests, almost all guests are my friends, but Louis and I are really, really friends. That means if I were to stop being a conductor, or if Louis would stop being a pianist and a conductor, I think we would still remain friends. And I know we would still remain friends. We have been friends for many, many, many years. The first time we met was in Tanglewood with the Boston Symphony for Ravel G. No, Ravel, yes.
G major, yes, yes.
Together. Louis is French-Canadian. I don't know if you define you as Québécois, Canadian, French-Canadian.
It all works.
It all works. Voilà la réponse diplomatique. This is a very diplomatic answer from Louis. And Louis lives between Montreal and Berlin and Switzerland somehow. And Louis has won many prestigious competitions, Busoni, Leeds competition. You have studied with Leon Fleischer. You have studied with Yvonne Hubert, who was, I believe, a student of Alfred Cortot. You have played with...
Exactly, yes.
You have played with all the greatest orchestras in the world. You are equally at ease with chamber music or with the concerto. You are known for your Chopin interpretation, for your Beethoven interpretation. You play Rachmaninoff, you play Mozart, and you are world-class accompanist. I do remember your intégrale of Chopin etude in Carnegie Hall a few years ago. You have recorded very faithfully, I must say, with Chandos, a very large repertoire. You are probably one of those universal pianists. More and more, the career is creating products, and the industry likes to have the French pianist, the German pianist, the Russian pianist, and you play everything, which I believe is the mark of all the greatest pianists as we love them. Before we try to talk music, how are you living this COVID time? Where were you when COVID hit? And how are you studying? Did you do a lot of concerts remotely on streaming? How do you connect with your family?
There's a lot to talk about. It's been, the whole year has been just before COVID, it was very dark in my life because my mother passed away at the beginning of 2020 in the month of January. And it was a shock, I must say it, because she was a rather energetic woman. I knew that her health was somehow not so good in the last years, but she wanted to hide it. She wanted people not to be bothered with it. But when I saw her at the end of last year, I knew there were signs that were worrisome. And so I came with my family to see her at Christmas. We canceled we were supposed to go on a nice skiing trip, and all of this was canceled because we had a feeling it might be, although with her, you never knew. I thought maybe she will rebound and come back, but she didn't. And actually she was suffering so much that they let her die as quickly as possible so that the suffering, would not go. And I must say I'm very, very grateful to great doctors. And so that was the start of January. And as soon as this was over, the pandemic started to be known. Of course, at first, we all continued to play. We all continued to travel. We just felt something was, strained with all these strange news. Pockets of Italy closed, the Chinese cities, some of them closed. So it was just a very, very bizarre feeling. And at one point, as I was going to take care of the legacy of my mother, going to the notary, emptying her last apartment. That's exactly when the first lockdown started. And, you know, I'm usually based in Europe, but I happened to be in North America at that time. And of course, I met my sister to do all these things in Montreal. And I was there on the famous Friday, 13th of March, which was really the beginning of the worldwide lockdown. And then I decided I would just.
Didn't we see each other in Dallas then, or was it earlier in the year?
Yes, I saw you then. I absolutely saw you at that moment. Yes.
And so then
And just before, I was in Dallas to help my festival in Italy with some fundraising. So I did pass through Dallas before going to Montreal, where we had the complete lockdown. So I was stuck where my sister lives, and I couldn't live with her because the conditions were not so good, but I was still able to rent a house in a beautiful place. And her companion has a student of yoga who had an electronic piano. So I got this electronic piano. And, you know, I think I did something that a lot of people did during this year, which is think of all the projects that I always wanted to do, but was not able to do because of all this traveling and have to change piano concertos and recitals all the time. Now I had nothing urgent. So I thought, what is it that I really want to do for many years? And it's to play Bach. Mm-hmm. And strangely, play the Well-Tempered, especially because I had learned the first book when I was an adolescent, but I never performed it because, among other problems, I'm not a very convinced Bach piano player because I studied the harpsichord when I was very young, and I loved playing Bach on the harpsichord. So I always had this ambivalence about on which instrument I should be playing Bach. And the irony is that, of course, with the electronic piano, there is a touch to get the harpsichord sound, which is just as realistic as the piano sound, which it means not realistic at all, but it gives you an idea. There's also an organ touch. So I started to play all the preludes and fugues, switching from one instrument to the other, changing, of course, the agogic, the tempos, the touch, everything. And it was just an extraordinary experiment also to discover, going on the internet and discover really brilliant organists and harpsichordists that we don't know so much. If you go, you know, on YouTube, all you see is pianists, the big names, and it's a very commercial. Then you discover that piano is so much more of a commercial medium than the harpsichord or the organists. I believe most of these people are very modest. Even if they play extremely well, they just attend their church services and make a little bit of money with those. You know, when you think of some great composers, that's how they survived. Fauré hated to go to and do services. Actually, you know, Fauré never wrote a note for the organ because he was so fed up having to play organ at Madeleine every week. But that's how he was earning a living. As a composer, it's just so difficult to make a living. So all of this to say that I was able, for those 3 months of the first lockdown, because now we have a second one, to work on this Bach project. And it was fun. Of course, there's nothing better for your soul than Bach. It was just amazing. So now, and then I discovered that it's the 300th anniversary of the publication of Well-Tempered Clavier, first book, 1722. 300 years later, this music is still as of our time as it was then. I mean, it's still played, it's transcribed for wind ensembles, for, you know, electronic medium, whatever.
But so you are the third pianist who is telling me he went to Bach in this confinement time. And I think there is kind of a cleansing quality to Bach, a depth, a no lying, a no just working for the audience, but no working for myself quality that is incredible. And also it's music that can be translated from one instrument to the other like maybe no other composer can. And so, you know, in your case, that is kind of obvious. But that doesn't mean that sound is not paramount within. But the sound can move from one color and one shape to the other because the thought is so strong, is so centered, it's so connecting to something that's beyond materiality, that any materiality can be all of a sudden magnified and transformed by that sound. And I think it's true what you say about modernity and Bach is true too. It's like the proper of the greatest genius of humanity is that every generation can find something that the other generation had not found into it. Sophocles, or Heraclit. You read it. We had to wait for Sigmund Freud to understand part of the Greek tragedy, and maybe in 2 millenniaries, someone else would find something. I find very few composer can do that, but Bach is the best for this, and we keep rediscovering him and seeing things of our time that are being foreseen by Bach, and our time makes sense through Bach. But okay, that's you with your clavier and so on and so on. Did you do concerts? Did you do any concert during all this time?
Yes, I did. First. The first thing I did while I was doing the first confinement, I was doing it relatively near. I mean, Canada is so big. Here, 100 kilometers
Right.
is nothing. It's around the corner. So there is a very nice music center called Domaine Forget, which is open usually in the summer. It's an academy for musicians. And of course, they were feeling that they would never make it for the summer. So they said, but we still want to do some streamings. So they opened the hall. I did the first streaming, which was at the beginning of June, with the singer Marie-Nicole Lemieux. We did the streaming.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful to do a streaming. It was not about me. It was accompanying. I did one. They absolutely insisted that I do a solo piece, and Marie-Nicole said, I'm dying to hear you play a Chopin ballade, the first one, actually. I said, for you, Marie-Nicole, I will do it. So I did it in the middle of a recital.
What was the rest of the program?
The program was a typical Marie-Nicole. So she did a lot of opera. For us, it's not easy. People think, oh, you just accompany. It's so difficult. For example, I had never done Mon cœur s'ouvre à ta voix of Samson et Dalila, and it's a string. They say ya pa 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 pa, this portato on the strings. Try to do it on the piano. It's much worse than a Liszt transcendental etude.
Yeah, Louis, it's actually very difficult to accompany with the orchestra too. You see, which maybe we can jump into this. Do you work often with singers? Is it something?
Not so often. Unfortunately, I did not do as much as I would have liked. There's a tendency, our world is so divided, so specialized, and singers, for one thing, tend to call pianists who work with singers, the so-called professional singer accompanists. It's very rare, and I think they feel lost. Because I discovered that a lot of those singers need a lot of nurturing. You're not only accompanying, you're coaching, but you're humanly coaching as well. They need to be made feel secure. You know how it is being a conductor who has to keep your your people happy and able to work together. The psychology of the singers, it's a completely different world.
There is worse than that, is when you have to take care of the pianist.
I don't have to do that. So you see,
I have to. There are divas too. They need to be helped. Did you are teaching also at I forgot to say this, you are the director of the Lacmus Festival in Italy on the Lac Como. And you are also teaching in Brussels at the.
I'm in Waterloo, Belgium, in a very nice private little academy called the Royal Chapel of Belgium, of the Queen Elizabeth Royal Chapel. which has a very long history. Actually, it started with the Queen Elizabeth of Belgium in the 30s. So we're talking about an institution that will be soon 100 years old.
Right. Are you still teaching by Zoom? How do you do
Of
this?
course, we still go on. I even went, beginning of September was a moment, unfortunately. I say unfortunately, we all thought everything was going well. Of course, it was not going so well, but we pretended. And I think that's why we are at the point where we are now. People didn't protect themselves, started to travel like crazy again. So I did at the beginning of September go there and give some live lessons, but there are still people who never reach the place. And I did a lot. I asked young musicians to send me their files, their video files or audio files, and then we do the lessons from that. Because I also discovered, we discover a lot of positive things, that it's wonderful to teach a lesson when the young artist has sent the material really ready. Because sometimes they come to their lessons live and they have the nose in the score. And
Right.
it's a lot of wasted time. So now they really feel they have to be forced to be ready. And so there's a kind of concentration that is really heightened, I would say now. But to go on with that subject, I just want to say this is what really worried me, especially now about the second lockdown, is the young artists. Because, we are at a point in our lives, we have made our names, things are rolling. Of course, we have to accept this parenthesis, but we are well known. So when things will start again, we will be re-engaged, concerts will have been postponed. So we are in a relatively good situation. But think of all these young people who are in their early 20s. They have no possibility. They were going to do international competitions. They were going to start. They are completely smashed in their will and their energy, because you know how it is, the early 20s, you have so much energy that has to come out.
Right. So that has happened in the past in history during wars, for instance. And you have entire generation of artists who were just lost. And some of them, they live paycheck to paycheck. They have to start a new job, a job that is essential compared to music that is not essential, apparently. And then they are not ready to start again. They are forgotten, and the new students are going to push. That's a real concern. Um, you are being optimistic, so am I, by saying that you and I will still have a job. Maybe this COVID is here to change our industry for a very long time. I mean, we don't know that. So you and I probably will have a job, but this might be a different job. And this might be a lot remotely, a lot with streaming, certain conditions, the length of concerts might change. And the whole industry, I think anyway, is going to change. That is, all that streaming part, that's going to stay. And some of it is very good. You know, you just were pointing out to some of the benefits of having to do lessons the way you had to do. One of the paradoxical benefits is that we also know the value of a concert when you are just next to the artist, and when there is that possibility that he is going to make a mistake, because it's not, all in computers and so on. And there is a need more and more for private concerts, small concerts, where you can probably, decide who is invited, and you can have their test, or they can have the distance, or it's on a voluntary basis. So and the way we are communicating in the industry is also changing even faster. That gives a little less power to agents, for good and for bad. And so there are probably things we're not even anticipating that are going to change. So let's move. You are teaching. I can imagine you are an extraordinary teacher. Who were so? Can you talk to me about who were your first teachers, and when did you discover you had this talent for music? What is it that struck you in what they were teaching you, and how did it connect to your personal life? As I mean, you started very early, I suppose, and how all of this connected to you.
It's it could be quite a long story, but I will try to make it,
We have
as
all.
succinct as concentrated as possible. Uh, because for a lot of people, it's a bit of genetics, but also a bit of luck, a bit of will as well, personal will. So it's all those things mixed up, and you don't really know what is the percentage.
Mhm.
When because when we ask an artist, why is it that you can make a career, and they say maybe 10% my gift, but the rest is hard work, good luck, and all these things. So the start is a little bit that as well, in the sense that my parents themselves were not musical,
Mhm.
but my grandmothers, both grandmothers were, but I was not aware of it because one of them was paralyzed in a wheelchair for many years. I saw her, but I had no idea exactly what was her past. And then I discovered, after having started to learn the piano, that she had been teaching up to 25 students when she was young. But she had 9 children, uh, and so she had to abandon completely the piano and teaching. So I wasn't aware of that. And as I said, by the time I was in this world, she was unfortunately paralyzed, having had a very, very hard life, raising those 9 children, and probably being also treated like women were at that time. Can you imagine a woman who has this sensibility for music, piano, and she has to give up everything just to fit the mold of the Catholic Church that says you must have all the children you can? And
How old were you when she passed away? How old were you?
she passed away when I was 9 or something like that, 8 or 9. And she knew, we told her she was almost deaf. But my father told her that I was starting the piano and that I was already learning a Schubert impromptu. And it's really sad because apparently she said, I think you're saying that just to make me happy. So she never really lived it. So this is very, very unfortunate. But at least the other grandmother was living with us. And it's because of her that I play the piano and I'm a musician, because we moved to a place where there was a piano stuck in the basement because they finished uh, there was this very strange in spiral. It's a staircase that was in like a spiral,
Right.
and they finished it after they had put sort of a really almost trash upright piano in the basement. So when they sold the house to my father, they said, well, we leave you the piano because we can't get it out of the house. I think
Mm.
it's still there today because they can't get it out. And then we went there with this other grandmother who was living with us at that moment. She also had a very difficult life. Her husband was an alcoholic. She had to leave her house, and she stayed with us for quite a while. And I was very attached to her, like all kids who have a wonderful grandmother, because as you know, parents very often say no, but a
Right.
grandmother always says yes. So we just had this very special bond. But I didn't even know that she was involved in music, because up to then there was nothing in our communication about music. Isn't that strange? And then we came to that house, and I will remember, it's like yesterday. And it's so many years ago. I was 7 years old. We just went in that basement. She sat down and she played. I remember exactly what she played. And I I was a shock. I remember thinking, I thought I knew my grandmother, but I didn't know her. And then I realized you give your soul when you're at the piano. Suddenly, everything that I could have maybe understood, you know, uh, through the lines, then it was all revealed. So this was also the shock that music reveals the soul of a person. And so this was incredible. And I thought, I want to do this too. And it was one of those old piano benches. You remember the benches when you lifted the cover and there were scores inside. So there were scores. And we looked at them. And then my mother told me where every note was on the staff. And within a couple of days, I was so interested. I had learned already. And then she told my mother, she said, he's so involved. We have to find a teacher. And she by herself, because she had studied when she was young, she found the right people. So that's how I started. My first teacher was a wonderful person. She was just a mother of 4 or 5 children who loved the music and was very good with kids. So I played for her, and she would never scream at me or yell at me. And I was a very curious musician. So she had a lot of scores. And I would say, like, even if it was Bartok or something like that, I would say, can I take this score? I don't know this music. She said, yes, take it. Bring it back next week. And because then I learned that most teachers said, no, this is not for you. You are not at that level. And you have to do things in order. She would never do that. She let my curiosity. I didn't feel hindered or, so that was the best start, because music was like a completely open world where there are no restrictions. So that was really phenomenal. And then after 1 year, I was very, very fortunate to be taken to the best piano teacher in Montreal. Almost all the musicians my generation and before me who play now were students of Yvonne Hubert, who was a very special lady. First, she was born, when I tell that to my students, she was born in the 19th century. I mean, I studied with somebody who was born in 1895. So this is quite fantastic. But even more remarkable is that she got her first prize of Paris Conservatoire in 1910. So she was 15 years old. And for anybody who knows the Paris scene in 1910, people can guess who was on the jury. You know who was on the jury? Fauré was the president of the jury, and he was not deaf yet, because we know that, unfortunately, he became deaf in the late 1910s and before his death in 1924. But then Albéniz was also on the jury. So it was amazing. I played music for her, and she knew these composers. So for her, this was contemporary music. I even heard that she did the Ravel trio, the premiere at Durand editor. She was the one who did it. I mean, it's insane.
It is insane. What was her school? Would you say she was from the French school of teaching? I mean,
completely, but the good one, the open one.
What's the definition of French school, if there is any?
Well, that's very interesting point. We cannot, I think it's very dangerous to bring it to just a few elements. Can be dangerous, because of course, some of the typical pianists and teachers of those times, and even of today, it's a lot about being transparent, being clean, the so-called jeu perlé, a kind of rational way of playing the instrument, and also of looking at the music, supposedly without much rubato, very ordered, very rational, very Cartesian, And you still have, I would say, 80% or 90% of the players who fit in that mold. But you had people like Cortot, you had people like Engelbrecht for the conductors. When Engelbrecht conducts Ravel, you think, but this is not the Ravel that I'm used to hear from French conductors. This is a Ravel that breathes. When you hear Cortot play, whether it's French music or German music, it breathes, and the sonority is so open. It's so full of incredible colors. It's not that stiff kind of stuck up playing that you find with a lot of other people. Of course, there are some elements that are a little bit extraneous. Like, I always had a problem with her vision of Beethoven, for example, but it was very good because nobody is good at everything every day. I mean, we all have our limits. We have cultural limits. I would say in those times, of course, people were much more connected to the motherland where they came from because people didn't travel like today. Today, a teenager can travel to Russia for masterclass, Germany, and the next day France, and have influences from everybody and learn from all those techniques.
As I always say, and as you know more than anybody, you cannot understand Berlioz if you don't understand Gluck. You cannot understand Gluck if you don't understand Rameau. You cannot understand Wagner if you don't understand Berlioz. You cannot understand Debussy if you don't know Wagner. So all those schools, they connect, they interconnect, they oppose themselves within themselves, and they make allies with the other schools. So I think it's very arbitrary. And I agree with you about the interpretation of French music. I think there is certainly a definition that has to do with sound and a certain clarity of expression, definitely. Um, and probably it's has to do with the rhythm of our language. It has to do with the way we organize our thoughts or don't organize our thoughts. Um, the expression is never directly sentimental, but the expression can be extremely intense. It's just that your delivery cannot be artificial. It needs to be felt. It needs to have that poetic ground base, and the expression is never trying to attract artificially the crowd. But this, I mean, the greatest of Berlioz is as connected to hubris and to a disorganization of feelings than I don't know, Wagner or Verdi in many ways. So I totally agree with you. We need to be very, very careful with this. And when you listen to Ravel playing his music, when you listen to Poulenc playing his music, I mean, they just go all over the place. They do whatever they want with it, and it breathes because they are human beings, and there is a drive because they try to have babies like any other nationality. And so it's very very annoying when you have these categories that are taught so pedantically and academically. And of course, I mean, in order to understand Debussy, you need to know Mallarmé, you need to know Baudelaire, you need to, Rimbaud, and if you have that sense of the painting and maybe some of the poetry, you might get something you don't get otherwise. But
Yes,
one
at that time, especially at that time of Debussy,
right,
Debussy was one of the few, even if he didn't travel so much, he was able, just being in Paris, to travel so much because
right,
Japanese art came to him through the world fairs. His friends were incredible painters, and he was able to connect. Uh, as we know, the French were already colonizing, for the better and the worse, North Africa. So they had all these influences already from Delacroix, who was maybe one of the first one, really fascinated and really exploiting,
right.
in bracket, this
No,
new
I don't know.
influence.
I don't know how you feel about this, but what is true, for instance, for me, if I have to learn an opera, for instance, I know if it is a French opera, just because of my familiarity with the language, I'm going to need less time than even if it's an Italian opera, because I'm absolutely fluent in Italian too, but it's a little less my culture, so it takes time, or German, but I get rather fast with it. But even French music in general, I usually absorb it maybe just a little faster than other music. But I'm not sure I do it better than others. And as you said, if I have to do a debut with an important orchestra or in an important opera house, when I had to do this, the carte de visite was the French repertoire, and I could do it totally wrong. But oh my God, this sounds so Gallic. This sounds so French. The way you do it. You are really one of the few pianists who is not afraid to tackle Beethoven again and again and again. And so, we were saying Bach is the source we go to when we want to feel this connection to the most essential spiritual part of music. Beethoven is the place we go to if we want to suffer, if we want to be put in our place as musicians, because if you do anything wrong with Beethoven, it's all about drama, harmony, structure, sound, sense of development. If you fail in any of those categories and you are excellent in all the other ones, it's not going to work. It's all going to fall apart. Whereas Mozart, you can just have that right feeling for it, and if you have the good technique, it's going to be forbidden. And Bach, if you have your sincerity with it, there is something that's going to come out of the piece that's still interesting. Why do you keep going back to Beethoven so much? And when did you start being interested in Beethoven? Although, as you said, you were, first trained maybe into that French school territories.
Yes, but at the same time, of course, this French piano teacher gave me a lot of Beethoven to play. And I immediately perceived that there was this problem, a little bit the problem of perception from the
Right.
French people. So I was very curious about that.
Did you talk to her about it? Did you try to say, but
No.
Madame?
No, I was much too young. I was much too young. And she was already a very, very elderly lady. I would not, it would have been very, very difficult in those days to do that. But who knows, maybe if I could have met her many years later, we could maybe have started to talk about it. Maybe she was even more open. When you are just a little boy, it's not, it could look very pretentious. Already, when you have, when you want to perform what I wanted to perform, it was already pretentious in itself. So I had to be careful in a way. But all of this to tell you that then, strangely enough, the first teacher with whom I worked immediately after I finished working with her, and we're talking about still a very early age, I was 15 years old, when a great teacher from Vienna, Dieter Weber, came to Montreal. He was invited by the Goethe Institute. So of course, that's the way you get to know another culture, through the Goethe Institute. And those, it's like Institut Français, they keep cutting the budgets of those, and they are so important for culture. This spreading of major cultures through the world. I don't have to convince you about that.
For understanding between people and for peace in the world, for the betterment of all locals and so on. I mean, you're right. And so this teacher was.
This teacher came to give master classes, and it was, of course, like lightning suddenly, because somebody who knew what to say exactly about Beethoven and German masterworks. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. Now we are on another planet. So I immediately decided that I would go, because I had finished my high school and I could already travel abroad. I thought, I'm going to Vienna, I'm going to follow that teacher. And so I went. And of course, I couldn't have more of a, complete change of culture, of way of seeing things. So for me, it was really very, very important, that first move to a completely different culture. And that's also when I realized that when you're very young, you can absorb so much of a different culture.
But the thing with Beethoven, I keep going back to all the symphonies, and I'm never satisfied. I mean, I maybe shouldn't say this too loud, but I am never happy with it.
Absolutely. Why do you think we all do cycles of Beethoven symphonies or piano sonatas, and we come back and we come back? And if you look, pianists, they do 2 and 3, and they record 3 times, 4 times. They never get it. We never get it.
I mean, for instance, you look at the Puccini operas, which technically, they are very difficult to conduct. They are probably, as far as pure technique, that is putting the thing together, getting it the right mood, the right speed, and so on. is more difficult than any Beethoven symphony from that pure superficial technique point of view. Um, I I know now, my Tosca, my Bohème, I know how it works. And so I have no surprises. And I know if it's not as good as I wanted, it's because of this and this and that. With Beethoven, you say, I got this, I got this. And then you arrive in the concert, you say, well, no, maybe no, you didn't get it. Because if you do this, you miss that. Or you are, of course, aware that it's not the right tempo. There is no right tempo, but the connections of tempi is very important. And you get constantly derailed in this. And I guess you are probably, that difficulty is what is interesting, because you grow through conceptualizing why it's difficult, and you have a space in which you can push. Where do you feel you are with this Beethoven development? And don't you want to leave it for 10 years and go back to it? How does that work?
Well, that's what I did. That's actually what I did, because I finished recording the complete sonatas and playing them in cycles around the turn of the century, so around 2000, 2001. And then I played a few Beethoven sonatas once in a while, but I almost stopped. There's a lot of Beethoven things that I did not play for several years. So
Right.
it was incredible to come back to it after so much time and discover so much. Beethoven is using, in fact, very, very little material. He's the first one who used, we could almost see the ancestor of the leitmotif. In
Right.
Beethoven, sometimes you have a very, very small cell, which is
Well,
proliferates,
right,
and then
right. I actually think Mozart does that in his opera, and it's really leitmotif in the literal sense of the way, because it's an idea that's connected to a character or even to a situation that comes back and that changes color according to the dramatic
but it's
development.
very, very organic. And that's why when you look at the Beethoven was maybe the first composer who wrote like you cannot even read it. It's just so sketchy, always, the way he writes. It's always like he doesn't know exactly what he's going to do with his material. The material is becoming all the time in the score and also in his sketches.
Reducing to his essence, it's even worse. It's like I take this off to go to finally the primal idea. Louis, you are
Exactly. And we have to do the same with his music as an interpreter. And we have
right.
to see the connections, because sometimes when you play a movement of a sonata of Beethoven with 4 movements, sometimes they seem so far apart one from the other, but they are not actually. It's all
no.
very, very organic, but
No.
everything is so deep. The connections are so deep that it just takes a lot of time to discover these interactions between all the elements.
So Louis, you are also a conductor. You have conducted a lot. You have conducted from the keyboard. You have also done concerts. Lately, you're doing maybe a little less. Maybe you will go back to it. What are for you the difference between conducting and playing the piano?
We were talking that it was so different to be with a singer than anybody else. But then this is, if this was different, then now we're talking about another planet altogether.
Right.
Because I think, I always tell young people in my class, and I hope they will listen, they say, whenever at one point in your studies, you must try to conduct an orchestra, because if you haven't tried it, you have no idea. It has nothing to do with playing an instrument, because when you play an instrument, the instrument responds. You can be violent, you can be relentless with the instrument. You don't need psychology with an instrument. It's a tool. It's wood and metal, and you can treat it the way you want. You don't need any psychology. But if you have 80 people in a certain context, in a certain surrounding, oh my God, you were talking about Sigmund Freud. You have to be almost at the, excuse me, I think you have to be almost at that level.
Yeah, sometimes you have to be a veterinarian too, and but beyond, of course, the human aspect, the psychological aspect, the leadership aspect, there are also some technical aspects that are very different. I mean, that response that is not immediate is not only a psychological thing, it's also like the group, the dynamic, but just the distance, the fact you have different instruments, and then the rapport you have to the music making has one different, layer of distance. I find myself that through years of conducting, you can forget about the technique, which probably is true about the piano too at some point, at least in the concert, and you can connect very directly to the music. But how do you connect to music when you are conducting? And so how is that connection different than when you're a pianist? Again, independently from the psychological or even human aspect of things.
Well, what I find fascinating is that just a few things in my gestures can change
Mm-hmm.
everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not a direct, on the piano, you can say because you are touching with your fingers this way. And so, but with conducting, it's a total thing. It's the way you look at people, the way you move, even your body in general. People say that when Furtwängler came on stage, the musicians in the orchestra said, there is no conductor who gives us the will to play music. He just comes on stage and we feel like we want to make music. I mean, imagine this is of course a piano or a violin would never say that of the person who will touch the instrument. You see, this
And I
is
think in the case of Furtwängler, it had to do with the immense sincerity of the music making and this way of always getting the sound out of the music, getting the sound out of the people in the best possible place. And so you can't resist that, because this is really like this better version of yourself that is in front of you and telling you, yes, you can do it, and just do it. And
yes,
and
and really, and that's where you see that the actual technical skills. Of course, everybody would like to have the perfect gestures like Karajan and people like that, but it's one aspect. You can have somebody. I have, for example, tremendous respect for Nicolaus Arnoncourt, for his ideas, for the
Mhm.
feeling. And I know a lot of young people who played in the Chamber Orchestra of Europe on this direction. And a lot of them told me also this kind of thing, this love that he had for the music was so contagious that it didn't matter if the gestures were a little bit
But,
awkward.
but it's not only the love for music. I think it's the clarity of the musical ideas. So you can have perfect conducting machines, but if they don't have a clear idea and a pulse that is a very strong natural pulse in themselves, the musicians are not going to know where to play. They don't need the body, they don't need the gesture to know where to play. They need a thought that is coherent and that is projected. And through time, you learn as a conductor. I've talked a lot about this with your colleagues here. Is you learn, the technique is to learn so that you don't have to look at the gesture, and they are not in the way of the music making, which takes, of course, a lot of time. You are doing all this repertoire. You're doing recitals. You are having a fantastic career playing concerti all over the world. You work with uh, instrumentalists. You work sometimes with singers. You teach. You conduct. But now you decided that was not enough. You are also the director of a festival in on Lac Como. Why do you want to add this to your activities?
Well,
Don't.
I didn't. That's a very good question because I did not want. I can tell you that not so long ago, I said I will never be the director of a festival. And
Uh-huh.
especially in Italy, I could never cope with Italian bureaucracy. Never, ever in my life will I go through those meanders, through this labyrinth of something like Italian bureaucracy. Please spare me forever. But the thing was that for years, because I started living there in 2011,
Yeah,
for
so
years people said, but
for people, you used to have a house in Quebec. You just
I sold it last year. So when I come to Montreal, I just stay in an apartment.
You also have a house or a floor on the Lac Como in Italy. So you were living there.
Yes. Yes, actually, that's where I spend most of my time now. So especially in the summers, and so all my neighbors and all my friends at the lake said, "You must do something because this is one of the most beautiful spots in the world. But look how little music there is." And I had to agree with that. But I said, yes, but that's not my problem. That's your problem. And when I come here, I just want to refresh my soul and be quiet. But then suddenly, there were so many people who wanted it with the right combination, and especially telling me that I would not have to do all this bureaucratic and political stuff, which one must do in Italy, but I would be helped by people around me. So it's just the right conditions were met at the right time.
What does it bring you though?
Oh, it brings first, instead of my original plan of isolating myself in my beautiful corner of the world with just, being inspired by nature, now I see a lot of human beings and fantastic human beings because, as you know, when you have a festival or you have an opera, you must mingle with a lot of people, fundraising, and you must meet so many people. And I met so many fantastic people because Lake Como is a place where people go exactly for the same motives that I had. We say that we go to hide and be quiet, but in the end, we're all human beings, and we'd rather connect with interesting people than just stay in our little space.
So and the festival, what's the idea of the programmation? Is there an identity to the festival? There is, I guess, a lot of piano playing, chamber music.
No, not too much. No, actually, I don't. I'm absolutely abhor piano festivals, so I avoid it like the pest. No, the
Yeah.
idea is mostly chamber music. First, for practical reasons, because we are in a part of the lake that is small, with small, fantastic locations, but they are mostly outside in villas or castles or museums. So wonderful spaces, but they are not for a lot of people at the same time. This is slowly changing. We have now access to the island, which is the only island on Lake Como, where we have a big space where people can sit up. We can have up to 500 people and even more. So it's possible now. We will start, when COVID is out, start to have even orchestral concerts. But that was not the idea at first. We were just thinking of a small festival, mostly, as I said, mostly about chamber music, also helping young people, and helping young people also in the area with musical education, because, as you know, musical education is disappearing from schools. It's especially worrisome in Italy. So we are trying to work on that.
Yeah, and this is not only to prepare musicians, but it's to prepare the audiences, and it's to prepare citizens, and it's a fundamental thing. Do you? I realized by being, director of several orchestras, I all of a sudden had to program myself doing things that I would not have done otherwise. And it's very interesting because it extends my repertoire. Have you found yourself in that situation already with the festival? Like you have a soloist that wants to come only if you play that piece at the piano and you are playing things you have not played yet? Or that's not the case? When you program yourself?
No, absolutely. We go for the programs. We don't invite people, actually.
Right.
We think of a program, and then we invite the people to do those programs. It's not centered on big names, not at all. Although we did start to have some really, really big names, but it's mostly about themes. We often have, of course, this year, like everybody else, we had the Beethoven theme. And ironically, I
Yeah.
had asked a lot of young musicians to play Beethoven symphonies in the Liszt transcription. So
Right,
we
right.
ended up, as nobody could hear an orchestra, people could finally hear the Beethoven symphonies, but played at the piano.
Right, which is so fascinating. Is there, talking of repertoire choices, is there a repertoire you have not played yet? I guess with the piano you can play always whatever you want, but in concerti that nobody has offered to you and that you would like to do.
Oh, of course, there is a lot of repertoire. I love the Prokofiev concertos. I did number one and three, but recently I heard a colleague play the number two, and I thought, why did I never play that piece? It's so absolutely extraordinary.
Right.
But certainly the concerto repertoire is a repertoire that I've played very extensively, much more than the solo one. Actually, I think
Uh-huh.
I played more than 100 concertos for piano and orchestra, of course, including Concertstücke and all these things. But it's still I played a lot of music for piano and orchestra. It's more the solo in the solo music.
What is it that you want to explore that you have not explored yet in the solo music?
Huh. There is uh, there is so much music at the beginning, for example, of the 20th century. There is an enormous amount of great piano music that has not been played yet. But what is wonderful is that I have these young artists in Belgium, and I make them aware. Especially now, I'm trying to help them make a first CD. A lot of them have never made a CD, so I'm
Mm.
trying to help them find a possibility. And of course, as you know, who wants to hear a young pianist play again the Liszt sonata or it just doesn't work anymore. If you have done already a couple of CDs and you're becoming famous, you are
Mm.
pretty free to make a recording of what you want. But for the first recording, you must make a splash. So I'm always looking. For example, one of them, I told him about the Reubke sonata, who was a contemporary of Liszt, and he died, I think, when he was 24 or 26. And he wrote a beautiful sonata, very fascinating sonata for piano. So I said, why don't you couple? Of course, everybody wants to play the Liszt sonata, but if you couple it with the Reubke sonata, then it becomes really interesting because you're doing something that is unusual and worthwhile because you are playing. I also talked about Vincent Dindy, who
Oh,
is
I love Dandy. Yes.
almost completely forgotten now. But he
Right.
wrote some of his music is absolutely astounding. And I
Mm.
know that because my label, Chandos, did the complete works for piano and orchestra. And I did the symphony on a mountain air, which is amazing orchestration, just
Right.
amazing.
Dandy was put a little out of the catalog for political reasons too.
Yeah, also, I know. But so he wrote a huge piano sonata, which is quite interesting, and nobody has recorded it. So I'm
Good.
trying, if I'm not doing it myself, I'm trying to keep the interest of these young artists towards. There are so many scores. We think we have done everything and everybody has played and recorded everything, but it's not true. Like just recently, last week, I was going through some research and I discovered that Max Reger, who is one of the best transcript, he's a fantastic composer, but he's a transcriber like you wouldn't believe. He did all the Brahms symphonies for piano solo. So
Right.
I think I am talking about it to the young artists, and I might do it myself because is there a greatest pleasure than conducting Brahms symphony? If you're able to play them on the piano, if you're a pianist, you have to be able. Somebody told me that Zoltan Kocsis, I don't know if it was the Reger, maybe it was even his own, because Zoltan was that kind of genius who just reads an orchestral score and makes a piano version immediately. But apparently, like Jean-Eflamme Bavouzet, my colleague told me when he went to study with Kocsis, he said, what? You don't know well the second symphony of Brahms? And he would just sit down and play the whole thing,
Right.
at the piano.
Right. Which is quite extraordinary. Um, Louis, what the hour has passed very quickly. I want to play with you Prokofiev seconds. That's what we should do next time. It was an orchestra. I miss seeing you. I miss working with you. Thank you for your
Me
time.
too.
And keep working on Bach. That's a good idea too. And And I hope I see you, you know, sooner than what the forecast is with this terrible pandemic.
Me
And
too.
thank you
I will
for
be looking forward to it. It's been a pleasure. It goes too quickly with you,
yeah,
as always.
as always, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you soon. Be well.
Bye. Good luck, everybody.